How do you stay up to date with AI news?
I don't.
Hi, and welcome to Future Ready Lawyer, AI and the Evolution of Legal Practice podcast. This podcast is a space for anyone interested in how artificial intelligence is shaping the legal world, from students and academics to practicing lawyers and legal educators. We know that keeping up with AI news can feel overwhelming. The pace of change, the volume of commentary, it's a mess. So we are not here to add noise. The aim of this podcast is simple: to help you stay informed, spark new ideas, and make sense of how AI is changing legal education and practice.
Each episode will bring you a mix of news, things like new tools, case studies, or controversial developments that are worth unpacking, and then take a deeper dive into a key topic. Sometimes we'll have guests. This could be academics, practitioners, even students, sharing what they're seeing and thinking. In our first episode today, we will dive into a couple of passion areas of ours, with Armin speaking about AI in courtrooms and Mark speaking about AI in legal classrooms, with me chiming in on what's happening in legal practice and in-house legal teams.
And we'll ask how all this is showing up, or not, in legal education. Are we preparing students for this evolving landscape? What are law schools doing? Are practicing lawyers learning what they need to know? Whether you're teaching law, studying it, or practicing in a firm or court, we hope this podcast gives you something useful, a bit of clarity, some food for thought, maybe even a new way to think about where things are heading.
One other important objective we have in this podcast is to have our episodes to be between 30 to 40 minutes max. And that's, we believe, the amount of time people commute every day. So we think it's going to be your commuting podcast to get all the AI information and ideas while you're commuting without, wasting your time.
Before we dive in, a quick intro. We come from different parts of the legal world, and that's the point. The field is too broad and moving too fast for any one perspective to make sense of it alone. What brings us together is a shared interest in what AI means for legal work and how we can support others to think critically and practically about the changes ahead. My name's Mark Bennett, and I'm the Associate Dean of Students at Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand.
Hi everyone, my name's Alex Vost. I'm part of the legal optimization consulting team at Minter Ellison. We work with lawyers to optimize the way they work, whether that's streamlining processes or embracing new tech like AI.
Hi, my name is Armin Alimardani. I'm a senior lecturer in law and emerging technologies and a former consultant at OpenAI. In the following, we're going to talk about a few topics. We want to give you an idea about how we think and what we will talk about in more details in the next 5 episodes. The first topic we will talk about is kind of a hot one. Some of you have heard probably in the news that lawyers have been using generative AI in the courtroom, and there are a few different ways that they've been using it. One is using AI-generated but fabricated content like case citations in the courtroom, and there are still more cases we hear in the news that some lawyer have used a fake citation and they submit it to the court. And one of the interesting things in terms of research here is that how come after 2 years, still some lawyers don't know about limitations of generative AI? They say, we didn't know it would hallucinate or generate fabricated cases. And it just doesn't make sense in any way, because anyone in any law firm already have heard of ChatGPT and all the, horrible things that happen. But another interesting thing here is that many of us would think there are maybe 10, 20 cases that are like this, but I've been working with the UNSW Center for Future of Legal Profession, collecting cases, and so far globally there are more than 250 cases that the lawyer or self-represented litigant has submitted some form of fabricated content to the court. It doesn't seem that it's decreasing, it's increasing. One of the things we theorized at first was that AI literacy, so people don't know about AI, they don't know about the limitations. But it turned out that's not necessarily the case. There are some cases that a person who got caught in the court submitting fabricated cases, but a few months after that, they submitted another fabricated citation to the court. So they clearly knew about the hallucinations, but they didn't stop there. I just want to move on to the next topic, talking about how things are turning out in law firms and how, legal professionals generally staying up to date with AI. So Alex is expert in this area. I will leave it to her.
Thanks, Armin. Yeah, it's so interesting to hear, as you say, that, despite knowing the limitations or having sort of a certain level of AI literacy, people still continue to make the mistakes. It is interesting to think about why this might be the case. Is is it a little bit of laziness? Is it a little bit of, oh, I don't know that I'll get caught. I don't know. It's very interesting. But, in my experience, I think that's something that's so front of mind for law firms is being worried about not having sort of information that's credible, or not having a human in the loop reviewing the outputs of AI. It really surprises me to hear about the sheer number of these instances where, lawyers have brought these sort of cases into courtrooms and saying, that relying on this information that doesn't exist, because in my experience, it's been the biggest or one of the biggest components of our governance framework within law firms is kind of making sure that there are mechanisms in place to make sure that that does not happen. And that was a lot of the questions that were coming from lawyers within our firm when we were starting to roll AI out, which was, how do I ensure that what's coming out of this is actually credible? And I think the point about AI literacy is a big one, in the sense that, we have to make sure that people understand the limitations of this technology and what it can give you and what it can't give you, and just how crucial it is to maintain having a human in the loop. And all of the workflows that I've seen being built out in law firms, but also in in-house legal teams, that is the key piece, is the human in the loop. Everything is reviewed before outputs are shared with clients. And I think it's also interesting to look at the different solutions that law firms are sort of looking at rolling out, and sort of one of the things that would sort of reduce, I suppose, the number of instances of hallucination is looking at things like RAG, so retrieval augmented generation. You're pointing the AI at a very curated set of resources and documents, and you know that it's the most up-to-date legislation or case law or relevant past advices because it's been curated by the team. And so then you've got citations being pulled out. There's reference points at the end of each of the different paragraphs that the AI has drafted. So again, it helps you start to validate some of those outputs. So I think most law firms are very, very focused on this. But obviously there are a few that perhaps need to be a little bit more focused to reduce some of those courtroom incidents.
Why do you think they're not staying up to date despite all the things happening? Like Supreme Court have issued guidelines. Despite that, we are still seeing these cases. Why some law firms are not taking this more serious?
There's probably a few elements to that. I think is there are some people that are a little bit scared of what AI means for the role of a lawyer and what it means for their careers going forward. So I think there's sometimes a little bit of a hesitancy to engage. And then obviously the less you engage, the less you know about the technology, and then in a moment, they might be relying on that after having not made the effort to learn and upskill prior, but they've heard other people talk about it. So they're like, oh, maybe I do need to use it in this particular circumstance, but they don't know the limitations because they haven't invested the time. And it then results in, things happening like hallucinations and relying on citations and things that don't exist because they don't understand that that was a risk factor. It is interesting to me because all of the firms that I know of and all of the lawyers that I've spoken to about this, it's the number one thing that's front of mind for them is the credible outputs, especially because, it would be detrimental for a law firm to provide a client with advice that has not been vetted and has not been based on, the correct case law legislation, etc. So it does kind of blow my mind a little bit that is happening because it's just not an issue that I'm seeing in sort of any of the spheres, that I'm working within. But yeah, I can only hypothesize about why there are certain sort of, instances or firms that are coming up against this. But I do think that it would be a lack of either engagement with training or capability programs, or just a lack of capability programs to begin with. And there's been a lack of a governance framework for those firms. And so there's not a real understanding of the risks associated with the technology.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about some of those causes of what's happening, because the whole awareness piece is clearly one part of the puzzle. I have this suspicion that some of the people using these AI tools in such an unsophisticated way, it must be about time pressure. It's the burden of work that they're under. They're just trying to cope with this wave, this pressure of getting through the case, generate an answer. Any law student, they would be taught, if you find a case through a search engine, through an internet search, through AI, you go and read the case to make sure that it actually says what it claims it says, that it's a good authority for the proposition you're trying to make. And you can just see, I think, maybe we can delve deeper in a future episode about case studies about why this has happened and obviously how to avoid it. But you can see that it's a time pressure thing. Like, is it laziness? It's definitely, as many courts have said, professional misconduct to present a fake case as an authority and not check it. But we definitely think that there's this weight of the burden of being a lawyer in certain firms, in certain kinds of practice areas, thinking in New Zealand of, legal aid, criminal legal aid, for example, family law legal aid. You get very little payment and very little amount of time to prepare your case. And so you're just working against the clock, and AI looks like a lifeline, and I think it can be if you use it properly.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Mark. It's so important to have empathy for lawyers. And as you say, that particularly in the case of things like legal aid, it's like you're wanting to help the most people, and make the most impact that you can. So trying to use AI to bring in some of that efficiency makes sense, and it's coming from a really good place. But when you are slumped and you don't really have time to critically analyze something in the same way that you normally would, then it is easy for things to slip through the cracks.
I have a lot of theories about this, and we have a paper with my UNSW colleagues in the process of publication. But let's talk about that in the next episode or one of the few coming up. And Mark, tell us about the educational aspect of generative AI.
So this is fascinating, not only because this is pretty much all I'm thinking about as Associate Dean of Students, making sure our law degree is robust, making sure that the people we send out into the world and we certify have got certain fundamental legal skills and knowledge. You have it. And the reason that I have to think about this a lot is that despite the talk of hallucinations, these generative AI systems are actually extremely capable of doing the legal tasks that are often the core of law school, tests and exams, legal opinions. The question there is, well, there's two questions really. Number one, how do we make sure that it's not an AI that has done a person's test, exam, opinion, essay? And then the second question is, if AI can do those legal tasks to a pass or a B or even an A, what does that mean about the place of those legal tasks within legal education, and then also further into the world of legal work, which of course is much more than just nuts and bolts legal analysis, legal research, legal drafting, memoranda, arguments, but that's part of it. When does the AI capability really supercharge that particular task or the conduct or the completion of that kind of task? And does it change the role of the lawyer? Does it take some work off their hands? I've talked to people working in law firms, practicing lawyers, partners who say, yeah, we're using AI and it's getting us 80% there on certain tasks, and then we've got to do the next 20%. That's a massive efficiency gain in helping the lawyer perhaps do the other work that the AI can't do. So we're grappling with, at the law school, law faculties all around the world.
Would you tell us a little bit about the studies in this regard, like the quality of AI-generated outputs and what these studies are saying, the empirical studies?
Yeah, so there's been quite a few studies over the years, ever since 2022 when new ChatGPT came out. It spits out words in response to prompts. So what if we prompt it with our questions from our essay or test or exam or whatever, our legal questions, and how does it do? So over the years, it's been becoming increasingly good at writing law school exams. So recently there was a study from the University of Maryland, Carey School of Law, and this was a follow-up study from some earlier studies from 2023, earlier models from ChatGPT, and they were getting C's and maybe a B in the final exams. So you would just feed the question from the final exam into ChatGPT, give it the prompt, and then what it spat out, and then you'd mark it. This is a C, this is a B maybe. Yeah, but that's interesting in itself because it's passing. Sometimes it would fail, but if it can pass some of the time, that's interesting. Over the years, it's gotten a lot better. It's getting majority Bs in 2024. In 2025, when these professors from, I think it's about 7 different courses, constitutional law, tax, secure transactions, different kinds of courses, questions. The tests had questions that were multiple choice or were long answer essay style questions, hypotheticals, applying the law to the facts. ChatGPT 03, so not even the current model at this point in time, but came out in April 2025. 03 reasoning model got as good or better than students in some of those courses. There were some problems. There were certain problems about the knowledge cutoff date in administrative law, where a big case overruling Chevron came out after the knowledge cutoff of 03 at that point in time. And obviously it didn't have access to the internet in that form. So it only got a B because it was applying the Chevron doctrine. But yeah, it's quite amazing to see that the progress there just from that study. There are a few other studies. We won't go into any detail on them now, but I just want to mention the Jessup moot. This is famous for any law student interested in international law. It's the big 700 university moot competition. You get through some of the earlier rounds, there's this massive kind of conference, people coming from all around the world, the top 1% of students or less from every law school is working hard and trying to come out number one in this moot competition. A couple of researchers entered the written memoranda written by generative AI models. So this was, I think, ChatGPT 4.0 and Gemini 2.0, so last generation models. They entered those into the moot court written answer evaluation. The researchers got these AI models to draft memoranda, and in a blind fashion, the judges didn't know that this was AI. They submitted those memoranda to the actual judges of the Jessup moot, and they did just as well as these top law students from around the world, if not better. They were getting 96 or 97 out of 100, being the top memoranda that was marked by the judge. And so that's just sort of mind-blowing in a way that the AI in seconds can generate a memorandum, and an advanced international law argument that is just as good, if not better, than those produced by the world's top law students working meticulously for weeks and weeks. So it blows my mind.
It is mind-blowing. It questions what are we doing even at universities? Do we need universities? What's going to happen to our graduates given that AI is doing something better than them in many areas? So Alex, quick question. I just said there are many law firms that lawyers from law firms are still submitting AI fabricated, content to the courts. What happens to our graduates when they're applying for jobs in law firms? If they say that, oh, we were trained how to use generative AI, or we know how to use generative AI to be more efficient, is that a positive thing? Or law firms would be like, oh God, one more, person gonna use generative AI and, submit fabricated things, and it would be really bad for our law firm. So that would have a negative impact on their application. What do you think?
I think it's viewed favorably to have those AI skills. And I know it's something that sort of our firm is looking to, and a lot of the other law firms that are, rolling out their AI strategy and looking to embed AI in their operating model. Having law students apply or graduates apply to the firm that have those skills and can, hit the ground running in terms of what they're using it for is very favorable. For example, even our summer clerks, 1 year they were welcomed into the firm and provided co-pilot licenses because they were encouraged to use them in their daily tasks, and at the end also asking them to develop out use cases in different ways that they would recommend using those workflows. And so I think as long as firms have a clear strategy in place and a governance framework as well to protect against some of those risks, everyone's sort of cultivating those AI skills, and it is a focus of the firm to uplift the capability of the lawyers already in the firm. But then it's really exciting when we're bringing in graduates who are learning new ways of using the tools. And obviously, younger generations can be quite savvy in terms of picking up tech really quickly. I think that's seen as a real benefit because then they can bring fresh ideas into the firm as well and share those with some of the lawyers that maybe aren't as experienced in using those technological tools. And so I think the skills are really important in terms of using the AI, but then it will also need to be coupled with the subject matter knowledge and also the critical thinking skills too, because it's one thing to know how to generate outputs or use prompts or sort of think about workflows that may be suited to AI, but it's another to make sure that what's coming out of it is credible. As we've been talking about, are we sort of checking the sources that are coming in? Are we critically thinking about the legal arguments that are being produced in a piece of advice or sort of another output? It's really important to make sure that that's coupled with an understanding or an ability to make a judgment call about the output. And I think that's where it comes in, sort of working really nicely with some of the more experienced lawyers. And there's that ability to then learn, and evaluate that output with the graduate. Because, when you're a fresh lawyer, you're coming in, you're learning a lot of things for the first time. I think, it is important to make sure that you're not just relying kind of blindly on the outputs. But again, I think firms that are thinking about their AI are on the front foot with all of that. And there's really good education happening to make sure that, those risks are mitigated wherever they can be.
Oh, yeah, that's very interesting, and it makes me think that how things going to turn out in terms of future work, like both in education and in law firms. The way I see that AI is, making us more efficient, it's kind of contradicts with the whole purpose of AI to make our lives easier, because it doesn't make it easier. We're gonna do other things. We're gonna do more things. There're gonna be more expectations to do things, and we're gonna work the same amount of time. Some of us may end up doing more because there's more competition now, making things more efficient. And I don't see really AI making our lives easier or better that the AI companies are advertising. It's gonna just stay the same, and some of us will lose their job because we are more efficient and they don't need as many of us anymore. Like 2 people can do work of 5 people, let's say. So what do you think, Mark? What do you think about university? How it's going to change our teaching or research?
I've been waiting for something real fundamental to happen for all of the university. And you sort of see that come through during COVID, where we had to go online. And a lot of lecturers who hadn't changed what they'd done for 10, 20 years, 40 years even, if they've been around that long, they had to at least record their lectures and do little podcast lectures. Certainly make sure that the lecture was available for people who've got COVID and anyone with a cold. They just couldn't come in, right? That was a big shift. We've had a big shift to using the learning management system as a crucial resource that is well filled out. We've seen that happen at my university. And so again, that's different from when I was going through university 20 years ago initially. I think AI is bigger. AI is bigger because it is about knowledge work being amplified and or replaced with generative AI. And you can see that happening. I've heard about copywriters doing a really good consulting job, making lots of money, and their job just goes away. It's gone. Translators, some of the work of translators of a certain kind, obviously, that's gone as well. And that's just the first wave. So I totally agree with what you say, that we might see lawyers being supercharged without what they previously had, which was juniors or clerks doing a lot of that grunt work, allowing them to produce what they can produce. Now that the AI can do certain of those tasks, they don't need those people so much. So I think there's a pipeline issue. Obviously, law firms are going to still want juniors to come in and make their way up through to partner to keep that firm rolling over. But as you say, I think we're going to be losing out people from middle-class knowledge work which was so big the 20th century, replacing the kind of factory work or the farming that died away a bit. We're going to see the dying away of knowledge work, I would say, unless AI comes up with new jobs. But certainly, because the university previously was taking people and helping them to do that kind of mid-range knowledge work really well, we've got to figure out what are our students going to be doing in the next 10 years, where some of that mid-range knowledge work is going to be done by AI. Skills and abilities are our students going to need in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think some of it's going to be the same, because you need understanding and you need these knowledge work skills to use the stuff that AI is spitting out and to improve on it and to take it to that next level and to have a conversation, do a negotiation, etc. But we might have to start thinking about how do we augment what we're already doing in the space of, you might say, soft skills or 21st century skills, communication, negotiation, all of the things that are very important legal practice. But to some degree, we do leave that to the law firms to train people on. up on.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing to explore. And I've probably got 2 points to touch on, one of which is, I completely agree in the sense that there is a risk that the time that we're freeing up by using AI just gets filled with more things. The legal profession is already subject to really high burnout rates and issues with kind of working long hours. I think it's initially sold as like, oh, it can, free up all of this time, and it can, but it's like, it doesn't make a difference if it's just filled with that, more things to do, essentially. So I think there needs to be sort of a consideration of what boundaries we do want to put in place, because if we do want to give people back some of that time to, again, not necessarily just be producing, but to be doing that high level strategic thinking, and to make sure that we are using the time to do what people are calling some of that higher level work, to take away some of the more administrative, operational kind of aspects of a job, streamlining some of those, but then giving space to something that is a little bit more interesting, or digging into sort of a really, interesting legal issue, rather than kind of, again, just filling the space with more work. It is interesting to think about what the role of the lawyer might be going forward. And I think it sort of helps to explore what we see as the role of a lawyer now. And obviously it is kind of the knowledge of that law, the ability to sort of reason and sort of argue certain points, but it's also the ability to support clients, be a trusted advisor, and be someone there that, the client can go to and be like, what do you think about this? Because even though, you can have all the AI outputs in the world, right? But it's not going to be a substitute for somebody in their time of need, or something that's sort of really critical, something that they're quite stressed about. It won't be sufficient to just say, oh, but that's what ChatGPT, or, that's what our AI told us to say, or this is what the output is. So it's kind of making sure that those human skills, those advisory skills, are still really cultivated as well. And so I think that that's something that there's a really large emphasis on within law firms too. And so, it is a tricky point around the junior coming in. A lot of the work that they would be training on or cutting their teeth on is, some of the work that is replaced by being able to use generative AI. It's good for research purposes, large document reviews and things like that. So it's really important for law firms to think about, what are the other ways that we can train our juniors to make sure that they are, learning what they need to be learning, that they are going to be ready to move up through the ranks over the years as well. And, it's interesting to ask the question, like, is the way that they have been learning initially in or previously in law firms the best way to have been learning, doing these large document reviews and research, or is it just a necessary evil because somebody needs to do that? And obviously it is a good way to get across, a lot of subjects over the course of their sort of initial graduate years. But I think it's just meaning that people are going to have to put more strategic thought into what skills we need and how are we going to build those. And also, maybe it does free up a little bit more time for that mentorship piece, with sort of graduates being able to spend more time with senior members of the firm, learn from them and how they, interact with clients. Or maybe it's using the generative AI in a certain way to train the lawyers as well, and sort of using it as a bit of a tool. And I know that that's something that's happening, in some universities as well, where it's kind of like, how can we use AI to study? How can we use AI to test these different scenarios? So it's just really interesting to think about, how that role is evolving, and how do we best equip new law students and even current lawyers to understand how their role might change over the next few years, because it is going to be a fundamental shift. And some aspects are really exciting, but then some aspects, understandably, make people a little bit nervous. So I think going forward with sort of empathy and understanding of what that might feel like is going to be really important as well.
I think we're cooked. I think we're in trouble, because I don't see the leadership to, like, creating a space for creativity. That doesn't exist. We always want to fill out the time somehow. We don't give any breathing room to people. And if you want to be creative, it's a risky business. You may waste your time. And, you spend a lot of time and effort into something, and it doesn't work out, and that's it. But we don't accept that type of thing, that you spend resources for something that there is no outcome for. So people are not taking risks, and they don't have the time, to think about it. And the law doesn't protect us against being replaced or displaced by AI. So I think there is a little bit troubling, and we should start thinking about this. And definitely we're going to have an episode talking about this in more details.
I just had a thought around this, is that realistically, like at my law school, and I think most New Zealand law schools, only a very small minority get to that aim that they have often when they come into law school, which is work for one of the big law firms, big commercial law firms, make lots of money, become partner, buy a big boat and a batch somewhere nice on the coast. And a lot of our graduates will go into government, into business. They'll have another degree in tax or accounting, and they'll go and focus on that. And so it is more of a minority that actually practice law, as far as I can understand. That might get exacerbated in a way. But on the other hand, I think possibly we might be able to open up more avenues for good legal jobs, serving that bottom end of the market in terms of ability to pay. People who are using legal aid, people who just wouldn't otherwise use a lawyer. Some of our graduates will use AI to make that profitable, to make it actually pay, even if they're not charging the client anything or are actually just charging a small amount. Because I've seen a lot of people talking about the access to justice benefits that we might get out of generative AI in terms of advising people in housing courts in New York, for example. There's a lawyer doing that. That question about will AI create new jobs? Well, maybe. Will it create some new legal jobs? And you can see, I mean, is this big new one in England, Garfield, which is basically a small claims clawback process, getting your small claim, which it's uneconomical to pursue. If you're going to hire a lawyer, if you can use the AI app to pursue that, maybe that makes sense now. Now that's just the AI doing it though, so it's not a great example, but maybe there's some human in the loop kind of examples where AI plus a human can answer that access to justice problem and get a few more legal jobs in there, possibly. But yeah, it sounds like a really good idea for another episode.
I think as well, it's really interesting to think about, instead of kind of the role of a lawyer as a whole or sort of within a law firm, is also thinking about certain workflows within law firms as well, because there's obviously some streams of work that are better suited to being, AI enabled. And then also, how do firms then deal with the billable hour? Which is, to your point, everything's kind of, that's how firms make money, is the billable hour. But how does that play in if we're making what we're doing more efficient? What are some sort of new pricing models or ways that law firms operate to make sure that there is still profit, but, it's maybe not reliable or relying on that sort of time-based, hour? And I think law firms for years now have already been moving towards things like fixed fees or alternative fee arrangements and things like that. But it will be interesting to think about how value is placed on time spent on certain things, because I think even if firms are kind of moving away from the billable hour, it's still in the sort of ingrained in you, kind of as someone that works in a law firm or you're around lawyers, that it's like, your time is sort of validated by, the output or the value that you've produced. Whereas to your point, maybe it's something you've spent 3 hours thinking about something creative and you're like brainstorming different ideas and things like that. But ultimately, maybe you don't have an output at the end because you didn't get to the result, but does that mean that time is less valuable? Like, I think it's interesting to think about that mindset as well. And I know some firms are doing a really good job of carving out that time to be innovative or to just be dedicated to either learning about AI, experimenting with AI, prompting, all of those kinds of things. But yeah, it's interesting to try and get around the mindset of, I need to be productive and producing value at all times, because I just think it's so ingrained, and sort of that the perception of what value means is so ingrained in the way that we've been working.
And one thing that all of this discussion is bringing up for me is that Richard Susskind has been talking for a number of years about tomorrow's lawyers. The rise of legal tech is going to change workflows. It's going to change legal roles. There are going to be people who is within a law firm, but it's not being a lawyer. And as I understand it, Alex, this is sort of your role in a way, but in helping people to think about what those new workflows are going to look like. And of course, legal tech's been around for a long time, automating some of these processes long before generative AI. And we still have law firms and we still have people being employed, and some of them in these new roles within the law firms. So, when you say we're cooked, I think overall, I do have that worry. And for example, Richard Susskind thinks that there's going to be fewer lawyers in the future, and maybe fewer people working in the law in general because of the workflows. But, you know, I think one of the things we can talk about is, well, as a law student maybe going through law school, as a law teacher, trying to prepare students for the future of the legal profession, how can we predict what our students might be if they do work within the law, and what kind of skills and knowledge are they're gonna need. So it's going to be really great to talk with Alex about that more practical element of things, and perhaps some guests from other law firms. I think that's going to be a real fascinating aspect of what we're doing with this project.
Yeah, that's so right. It's understanding all the different pathways that exist. Like, I studied law, have a law degree, but have never practiced, but I've been in law firms my whole career. So it is really interesting to explore, what that might look like. And I mean, that's kind of the birth of, the legal operations field that's been around for, a while now, but it was something that kind of a lot of people didn't envision themselves going into or doing when they were at law school or sort of practicing as a lawyer. But there's been so many different roles that have, evolved over the years. And it is really exciting to think about what that looks like. And also think about how valuable legal skills are in a lot of roles, that aren't practicing law. Or, you are practicing law, but maybe you're in an in-house legal team, which obviously requires legal skills, but then it also requires consideration of, commercial elements, like what does the strategy look like? How do I work in with the broader organization? And so, it's not kind of as strict, black letter law. There's a lot of other elements that you can incorporate. So I think it's useful to kind of show people the different pathways and the different ways that, all of the great things they're learning can be applied in, all of these different roles.
Okay, so that's the end of this episode, and we hope you enjoyed all these topics. As we said, we're going to talk about all these topics much further in the few episodes.
And in the next episode, we're going to dive into what's happening in the current landscape. So how has legal tech evolved over the last sort of couple of decades, bringing us to where we're at now, speaking about practical use cases that we've seen in both law firms and in-house legal teams, what's predicted for the next year or two, and how we're grappling with all of that in both of our sort of classroom or educational context and then law firm in-house legal team context.